Hey guys, how's it going? Jam here, and welcome to another track build battle with a little bit of another theme that I've come up with today. It is the Daytona Duel. Obviously we've had the Daytona 24 hours in real life recently, and I figured why not pick two cars that fit that sort of theme and simply have Daytona in their name. I've just realised I was going to do a little bit of research to see if either of them have raced at Daytona, and I have no idea, so I'm sure some boffins in the comments might let me know. Anyway, as you can see, we are starting out with this Shelby Daytona Coupe, or however you would like to pronounce that last word. It's a very, very nice car, actually. I really rather liked it, and in general, it's a good-looking car. It's nice to drive. It's pretty quick on Forza, typically. What's not to like? So I was very, very happy to start out today's episode with this car. Not necessarily the most iconic paint job on it, but I don't like having two cars that are the same colour in the same video, just because it just makes it a little bit easier to differentiate between them when they're on the small screen for the side-by-side. So I went with the nice red number with some pretty cool looking stripes, number 15 on the side. I like the number 15, so yeah, I really like this one. Anyway, I've done it again. I've started off the episode by waffling, so nothing new there. So let's jump straight into the statistics of this car. Top end speed, well, it's quoted at 6.7 for the Forza stat, but as we know, that doesn't really mean a lot. What we do know is that this car was hitting 153 miles an hour on the straight. If I had a really good run out of Spoon through this last corner, I could just about get it to tick over to 154, but not really consistently. So 153, we would say, was its top speed. It's got 5.9 handling, which is one of the highest in this series so far, and I could really feel that on track. As I've already mentioned, this car was absolutely lovely to drive. A little bit letting it down in the Forza stats is the 5.7 braking, which is pretty average for this series. 5.6, 5.7, 5.8, we're normally around that sort of area. So 5.7 is not too bad, but compared to the 5.9 braking, you'd expect it to be a little bit higher. That said, on track, I actually felt like the brakes were really rather good. One place that I really noticed the difference in the brakes is this corner that we're coming up to now. You'd think I would have planned this, wouldn't you? Coming around with this really fast right-hander, you hit the brakes just as you sort of straighten the car up after the exit for the hairpin. And you can really tell how good the brakes are on the car, because sometimes you have to brake while you're still sort of coming around the corner. And this car, you was like round the corner, straightened up, and then you hit the brakes before you go into the hairpin. And yeah, so the Forza stat there, it lies in my opinion. And the final stat that we have to look at is the 8.6 acceleration, which again is a little bit average for the series, but average is good. Lots of cars have been doing rather well with about 8.6 acceleration. So on to the other statistics. It's got 463 horsepower, which is certainly not the most in this series, but considering it only weighs 2,366 pounds, that's probably one of the most impressive power to weight ratios we've had in this entire series so far. 463 horsepower is coupled with 405 foot-pounds of torque, which is again really rather impressive. One of the complaints I did have about this car is, due to the way it built up in the upgrade shop, putting race tyres on it shot it immediately into the middle of A-class. And that was, I know I put the aero on first, then the race tyres, and that's it, it was in the middle of A-class. So once I put the rest of the handling parts on, like you've got to have the race brakes, race suspension, race roll bars, obviously it has to have the race roll cage in this series, it already had up that like 5.9 handling, so I didn't really want to spend more PI on improving the handling further by giving it bigger tyres, because it already had, as I say, such good handling, so I had to prioritise giving it as much power as possible. Now unfortunately the standard tyre size is only 205s on the front, and watching it back now I can see just they do look quite skinny, and that front end with those such small tyres on this car, it really felt like it was lacking a little bit of front end bite. Fortunately it had two 6.5s on the rear, so it was pretty good at putting the power down. Again, that's not the biggest tyres we've had, but with such a small lightweight car it's absolutely fine. But anyway, I mean, there's not much more to say about this car for me. I absolutely loved it. So let's go and see if I love the other Daytona as much, shall we? So, next up we have the Dodge Charger Daytona Hemi. And this is a very, very interesting car to put around this track, because not only does it fit the theme of the episode, which was quite loosely, simply based on the fact that it's got Daytona in its name, it's also the second Dodge Charger to go around this track. We have previously had the normal road version, the Dodge Charger RT, that went around about a month ago in the Bullet Chase episode. So we've got almost a three-way comparison, or a double comparison going on for this car that is beautifully painted like the King from the Cars movies. So, I don't really know where to start. I'm going to do something I haven't done yet in this series. I'm going to spend longer on this car than I did on the other one, simply because I want to compare it both to the Shelby and to the other Dodge Charger. But we will start off, as per usual, talking about the normal comparison to the other car that went in the episode, the Shelby, not the Shelby Cobra, sorry, the Shelby Daytona. The Dodge has higher top speed stats. It's got 7.1 compared to the Shelby's 6.7. However, on track that gap was far, far smaller. Yes, the Dodge was slightly quicker down into turn 1, but only about 1 mile an hour. It was consistently hitting 154, maybe 155, whereas, as I said earlier, the Shelby was doing 153, maybe 154. Handling wise, the Shelby has an advantage. It has 5.9 compared to the Dodge's 5.8, but again, that's quite a small margin. It's not really going to make much of a difference, you wouldn't have thought. However, the braking stat is completely flipped on its head. The Dodge should have a significant advantage, a 6.0 braking stat, which I think is one of, if not the best, braking stat we've had so far, compared to, as I said, the Shelby's surprisingly low 5.7. The one similarity between the cars is the acceleration stat. They both share 8.6. Now, as you would expect, the rest of the stats are completely different, because this car is nothing like the Shelby at all. The sheer size of this car compared to the little Shelby is going to make it hugely different. And in fact, before I do mention the stats, the size of this car genuinely made it was noticeable on track. It came into a few issues because of its sheer size. Through turns 2 and 3, they're very tight through there. Having a huge car like this, with another issue that it's got that I'll mention later, it was rather tricky through there, and also through the alternate chicane as well. It's a very, very tight chicane, and it's really hard to get this huge boat of a car through there quickly. But, as you expect, being such a bigger car, this car weighs 3,100 pounds. Compared to the Shelby's 2,360, so that's what, 800 pounds heavier. That's a huge margin, and comparatively, it's only got 120 more horsepower, 580 compared to the Shelby's 460. So in terms of power to weight, the Shelby is certainly having the edge there. Although the Dodge does have a lot more torque, it shares 583 horsepower and 583 foot-pounds of torque. Whereas compared to the Shelby with its 460 horsepower, it's only got 400 foot-pounds of torque. And of course, as you'd expect, with a much bigger car, it's also got much bigger tyres. It's got two 6.5s on the front, which is the same as the Shelby's rears. It's only got two 0.5s on the front, and it's got two 9.5s on the rear of this big beast. Now, let's talk a quick little bit about how it drives. It was very weird, because it almost felt like it was four-wheel drive at times. I've never had any car in this series so far that would understeer so late into a corner. You'd be well past the apex and it would still be pushing wide, trying to run wide. And it was really rather unsettling. And I think that's largely because of the size and the effectiveness of the rear wing. I'm used to having rear-wheel drive cars that step out at the rear. I'm not used to having cars that have got so much grip like this car did. Now this rear wing, again, I should have looked, this is off the top of my head. I think it produces 570 pounds of downforce. And that's standard without a tune. The standard Forza rear wing will produce 200 when it's fully tuned to provide maximum downforce. From standard, as the cars are in this series, it provides 150. So it's got something like 4 times the amount of rear downforce. And I think that amount of rear grip was actually hindering the car, because it was not allowing it to be quite as nimble. It took longer to really get through the corners. It just needed that extra time. And at the same time, that means it just didn't suit my driving style, which was a shame, because it's a really nice car. And the Dodge Charger road car that this car is almost aiming towards more than the Shelby is set in a really impressive benchmark earlier in the series. It went P4, or it is currently P4, with a 126.5. And the way this Daytona version is going, it's just not going to meet it. Another thing I've got to mention is the brakes. I said how impressive they were with the stats. On track, it was completely the opposite story. The Shelby, with a relatively low braking stat, felt fantastic, but the expectation of the brakes that I had being such a high stat on this car, it was disappointing that they weren't as good as I thought they should be. I mean, they were good. You could brake ever so slightly later than my sort of usual braking points, where I've come to expect to be able to brake. But they weren't so good that I could brake much later than that. It was like maybe half a car length. And considering this car is not really carrying any much more speed into the corners, especially when it's struggling on corner exit, that's the other thing. It's like this car's got half decent acceleration. It's not as good acceleration as the road car. The road car had 8.7 compared to this car's 8.6. But because you're turning through the corner longer almost, so you can't get on the power as sooner because you're not straightened up as soon, which means the deficit in acceleration that's already got to some of the cars in this series is just going to be amplified through that. Anyway, I've had the extra lap in this car, rambled on long enough, so let's go and put them in a head-to-head and see which one's fastest. So here we go then for the head-to-head. The Shelby on the left, the Dodge on the right, and flying down into turn 1, they are pretty neck and neck. We know the Dodge can get to a slightly higher top speed, but that doesn't mean it gets to turn 1 quicker. The Shelby potentially having that bit better acceleration. Hard on the brakes, both cars I'd expect to be roughly even on the brakes because of the way that the Daytona seems to over-improve, or overperform, sorry, on its brakes. Whereas the Dodge perhaps seems to underperform, and the stats that sort of equalises. I'd say that brakes are probably pretty even. Both taking a nice little bit of a cut through the first Degner, touching the curb on the outside for the second Degner, and in between the Degners, and then also on the second Degner, running a bit of exit curb as well. Flying up towards the hairpin now, both using a lot of curb on the inside, both hugging it nice and tight this week. Last week with the rear-wheel drive swapped cars, we found that sort of taking a swinging line for a tight exit worked better, but these cars taking a more traditional line. And then through the tight and nimble needed alternate chicane, it looks as though the sheer size of the Dodge Daytona has really hindered it there. For the first time we're seeing a little bit of a difference in these cars. The Shelby seems to be ever so slightly ahead, although it seems to have been pulled back a bit closer there just on the run into Spoon by the Dodge, although it does look like the Shelby is ever so slightly ahead at this point. It's going to be a simple drag race to the line now. They are certainly both very, very close. I can't tell from this angle who's going to be there, but the cut, and there we go. That very final section really showed the difference. The Shelby getting it by a not insignificant margin, and it was very, very fast. The Shelby splits the Novas at the top of the table with a 126.310, putting it into second place. And I just don't have a bad word to say about this car. I absolutely thoroughly enjoyed it. So on to the Dodge, and we know it was slower, but how much slower? Well, it would turn out to be 0.4 of a second slower, which isn't a massive, massive margin, but you can see there that it's down in 10th place. It actually knocks the benchmark car out of the top 10, and it's not only 0.4 down on the Shelby, it's also 0.2 down on the road-going Dodge Charger, so maybe the race car just simply isn't better. Anyway, that is it for this episode. Leave your suggestions in the comments, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.